Hello again. I'm going to do the first 3 pages of this next section, for sure using this technique that was inspired by my do-it-yourself art journal, the accordion book that we did in another lesson. I'm starting off with regular pencil, and I'm using just a soft leaded, not a really fine point, but a regular soft pencil to make some very intuitive fluid marks. And I use the tip of the pencil, and I don't try to do anything too contrived. I just intuitively make some marks and not overthink. And again, this is just to get into my zone. And now I've brought out a Stabilo Woody, which I love. I've mentioned these before. I've used them in the other sections. And I love how I sprayed water first, and then when I put the Stabilo Woody down, it already goes quite dark, and then activating it with more water just makes it flow throughout the page, which is quite interesting. I'm going to do this on 3 pages. I'm going to make sure I keep the water out of the inner seam there, and I'm just correcting that a little bit to make it flow from left to right on the spread. I'm going to dab that with paper towel to lighten it and to help dry it a bit, but mostly to lighten it a little bit. Let's do some more on this page. Again, I'm activating it with water and then having fun putting down some marks. You can see it's already starting to spread, and I love that. When I add, when I do that over wet paper, it spreads out very feathery. It's quite fun, especially there. That's really, really fun. I want to maintain that, so I'm not going to dab it. I want to keep it like it is. But I am checking the page behind, and it's still quite wet, so I'm going to dab that one more time and then keep a paper towel in there to keep it dry. So I'm really liking what's happening here. I'm going to give it a blow dry. That's really, really fun, those sections there. It flows like feathery. It's so fun. Who knows where this will take us, but I'm having fun with it. I'm going to keep a paper towel there in case it's still a bit damp, and let's have some more fun. Now, if I would have put matte medium on the pages first and then done this, it would not have feathered quite like that. It's feathering because it's soaking into the grain of the paper. Now, this looks like I'm pressing quite lightly, which I am, but there's so much pigment in that crayon. Look what happens when I activate it with water. So before I activated with water first, then I colored with the Stabilo Woody. This time I just colored with the woody and then sprayed with water. Look how fun that is. It's like a bunch of caterpillars. A lot of fun. I'm going to let that dry on its own. And it helps to keep it upright so that these 3 pages don't stick together while they're still damp. Now, because there is so much pigment in those Stabilo Woodies, I have to put a fixative on here to protect the black paint, keep it on the page. Otherwise, it will smear as soon as I add anything wet over it, like water or matte medium. And I will be putting matte medium over it. So I am spraying a fixative, and I'm just wiping. Oh, look what happens when you get too close. See how easily it smears? So I'm letting the fixative dry, and hairspray works as well, just as well. And I'm going to spray, I'm trying to spray pretty much just on top of where the black Stabilo Woody pigment is, and dabbing away anything that's extra so that it'll dry a bit quicker. And I'm helping it along with the blow dryer. Working my way back from the 3rd page, now the 2nd, and now I'll do the 1st. This fixative sometimes works, but again, it's quite dark, this Stabilo Woody. So when I go to the next stage of adding matte medium, it is a little bit still risky. The black might still smear. So what I'll have to do is when I put the matte medium over it, I'm going to have to be very gentle and not press hard with the brush when I apply it over top of the black. Otherwise, if it is still a bit wet, it will smear. I'm liking these marks. They're fun. I've got quite a mess in the middle of the page there for bleeding through. I'm just checking to see what color I want to do next as well. I want to carry on this yellow, orange, and pinks so that there's continuity from the previous spread. And it helps with the bleeding part in the middle of that page, which is already orange. So I'm going to put matte medium, a good coat of it all over the page. Again, I can't press too hard. There I pressed too hard. You can see it smeared the black and made a bit of a line. So I'm actually, even though it looks like I'm pressing hard, I'm actually holding the brush very lightly over the page when I spread it down so that it doesn't move that pigment around. And there I was able to sort of move the opposite direction and get rid of that little stripe. And because it was still wet underneath, the brush picked up a bit of black, so I wiped that off the brush as well. So I'm using a little bit of high flow acrylic white, which is semi-transparent. And what I'm doing is trying to make layers. So in going over top of some of this detail, it pushes it to the background, and some of those circles pop forward, and it creates more depth. And later when I add, this is just the first layers, mark making and then putting white over here and making depth, and then later I will apply color. This is a good chance to add some white in the center seam there so that it can cover up some of that bleeding color that showed through before from the previous spread. And I'm just fanning it out a little bit. I'm trying to be quite intuitive here. I knew I wanted to cover up the center seam a bit, and I knew I wanted to add a little bit of white throughout the page, but I didn't want to overdo it. But it's good and wet, so I have to make sure it's really blow dried quite a while. And each time I looked at it, I thought as it dried, I'd add a little bit more white there in the middle. And because I've added white in many other areas as well and spread it around with my finger, when I go and add color over top, it won't show up differently just in that white center seam area. It should look nice when I apply paint overall. After that was dry, I went and did the same thing with these other two pages. I made a boo-boo. I did so much editing or so much filming today that I didn't always have, I thought that what was on was off and off was on. So I've missed a couple of segments of videotaping, unfortunately. I do apologize. So I've decided I didn't like the fluidity of, and the fact that that other high flow acrylic was so semi-transparent. So I'm putting my brush directly into a tub of heavier paint, and I'm just fanning it lightly over top. I'm not pressing really hard. I'm actually holding the brush very, very lightly and just dabbing it a bit over top, just to sort of make more of the detail recede into the background. And it just creates more interest on the page. I'm still not sure how this will all show up once I add color, but this is one of my steps. And again, I'm just pressing lightly. I'm not even concerned that if I don't get all of the original paper from the book, because it's okay if there's a difference in texture. Wherever I don't cover it right now with this paint, the paint will soak into the paper differently, and in other areas it'll sit over top of that paint. So we'll have a little bit of variety. And we won't know until we get there. So I'm going to make sure this is good and dry. There's a lot of paint on there. And it was very dry before I started the next. So let's do the same thing. Let's add directly from the tub of paint. Again, applying it quite lightly. And I'm just sort of spreading it around, trying to keep the integrity of these smudgy black lines. But I don't care if some of it gets covered over. Now, I haven't been doing black so much in these 3 little tiny journal books, but I just thought it was time to play around with a little black. Normally I find for my soul journal I don't want a lot of black, but these are very dreamy, wispy, moody looking lines. I grabbed a toothpick while the paint was still wet, and I'm scraping into the surface of that paint so that later on, and I'm dabbing some of that away, it was too much. What happens is once it's dry and I add paint, the fluid paint will soak into those scribble lines and accent the scribbles. I love this page, but it's a lot of black, so let's just see what happens. Again, I'm just fanning it out softly, and actually inside those ovals, I'm just dabbing a bit. What I wanted to do was create an inside section to these circles and not have them just smudges of black. And again, I'm just fanning it around. That brush this is sort of dry on dry, and that's how I was able to get that grainy effect. I didn't add water first, and the paintbrush is quite dry. So this is dry on dry technique, and it's just another way of applying paint. That needs a good blow dry as well. And I'm keeping them separate. There was a lot of paint, and so I'm just cleaning up the edges a bit because of the excess paint. And I decided before I finished that I wanted to soften the look of this page and have more calm areas. So I'm covering up 2 smudges. And that just makes it a little gentler. It's telling a different story. Messy fingers today, and giving it a really, really good dry. This dried for hours, by the way. So I want to bring out the same pink, orange, and yellow for continuity. I'm getting paper towels under there as well so that it'll soak up, because I know I'm going to apply the high flow acrylic paints, and then I'm also going to spray and let it spread from the water. So I'm trying to make sure I've got lots of paper towel there on the ready for any flow of paint. I don't want it to get on the back sides of this spread. And because it's sitting on top of already matte medium coating of paper on the paper, it's not getting absorbed. That yellow is not getting absorbed into the paper. It's, although it made a mess behind, it's actually sitting on top of the white paint. So it's not necessarily absorbing into the paper and drying as quickly as it would have if I wouldn't have put the matte medium. But I'm just trying different things. The previous spread with these colors was very busy with texture. I purposely got texture from the paper towel. This time I want to have the same colors moving around the page, but I want a different effect. Because we did this mark making first, then covered up some of it with white, what I'm trying to go for is kind of a marbled effect. So it might be the same colors as the last spread, but it's a different effect. And now I'm going for richness of color. And again, I will dab some of that back, but I don't know until I dab back and spray what's going to be revealed. And because, I mean, that's funky and that's really cool like it is, but I already did texture like that on the spread before. So I just wanted to dab away some color and decide where this was taking me. And now I'm adding a little more again. And then I'm going to spray water and let it spread around with the water and see what happens. And that makes it more dreamy. And I think that's more complementary with the marks that we had below as well. There is a bit of texture because of the grain of the paper, but not from the grain of the paper towels. And I'm just using my finger to spread it around a little more. It's very, very wet, so that will sit and settle. Dabbing back a bit, always playing with the effect. Put paint down, dab it back, put paint down, dab it back. I'm just having fun here playing, seeing what happens, how the page starts to talk to me. Let's get some more pink on there. It's okay to be a bit bold because it always dries a bit lighter. Now, you, like I say, that texture that you see there, that speckled texture is from the paper, not from paper towel. And I'm enhancing more yellow, more of the Indian yellow. I really like bringing out the richness of that yellow, so I think that helped. That's really pretty when, as soon as I spray the water and help it spread around a bit, I like that effect. Dabbing at it very lightly, paper towel and finger, just dabbing at it. That's fun, it's different. So again, same colors as the previous spread, but a different effect. I find this is very dreamlike. So that needs to dry. Yeah, they're different. But they will look good opened up on a shelf with these pages next to each other. They will be complementary to each other. It'll be a nice continuous flow and movement of the colors throughout the book, which is what I've been doing with this third book. I'm almost treating it like it's an accordion book, because it will, my plan is to leave it open on a shelf all the time, and that way you see it as an accordion effect. That's pretty. What I'm doing, I always like to reveal ovals and circles if I find them. So by painting some white in the middle, brings those forward more. And my plan is to let that dry and then add some color over top of that white. But the white is just to be very opaque and cover over anything in the middle so that I've got a nice clean surface inside for some color. But I mean, it looks good left as white as well. I don't mind that look at all. But I like to teach you glazing, and that's what I'm doing right now. I'm glazing more yellow, because I call it glazing because it's very transparent. And I really like how that brought out the depth of the color. That's the intensity. And I'm going to dab some in that circle there. I think that's fun. So this is glazing, and I'm going to glaze those 4 little white circles as well with a bit of pink. And not to get too dark, I'm adding white water to a container with a little bit of magenta so that I can get a softer pink. It's still going to be bright, but I'm softening it a little bit. So I'm just dabbing. I'm going to apply and probably dab back a little. So I'm over applying, and again, some of that will be removed. But it's just making the whole 2-page spread work a bit better. I like that. I think I ended up adding just I put my finger in that pink and added just a little bit inside each of those circles again, right there. It just shows up now. I like that a lot. So let's do the next one. It seems like there was a lot of smudging on the back there, so that makes me decide that I need to continue with my gold. At least through the center of this new spread. So I'm going to get my quinacridone Nicolazo gold, not the Indian yellow, which was on the previous page predominantly. And I want to smudge this firmly so that it gets blended right in. I don't want a lot of pigment on this page. And I'm using my finger to dab the middle, and I'm trying to keep the water down to a minimum, but by activating it with a light mist of water allowed me to move that yellow around the page a bit with my finger. This has got quite a gentle look to it, this page. I want all 3 to look different, even though we did a similar technique. I want them all different. So that page that we just turned, that's got very deep colors. This one's going to be quite subtle and cloudy. And for that reason, I'm using blue that was previously already mixed with white. It's fairly opaque because of the white it was mixed with, but it's still revealing some of the black from the mark making. Again, I want to keep this soft and light and dreamy. I'm wiping it back. So I want the blue to show up as blue, but I want it to be very subtle. Just going to dab a little bit more here and there. It's a pretty blue when it's added to the white. I'll do a little more in the bottom. Now in this case, I rubbed a little, I went beyond and I let the blue touch the yellow, which becomes greenish. And I don't mind that. I like to show you sometimes how you can blend and get another color. So of course, yellow and blue makes green. It's very, very subtle, but it is there. So I've got those scratch marks from the toothpick that scratch through the white paint into the paper texture surface. And the only way to get blue to really show up inside those grooves is to put a fairly dark blue that's fairly wet and let it run into those grooves. And then I dabbed away the surface with the paper towel. So now I'm rubbing it across with my finger, forcing that blue to sit down inside the scratches, and then dabbing away the top surface so that it's paler. It's a very subtle effect. You could do this darker if you want, but I wanted to keep it soft and dreamy. So I didn't want the scribbles to be really, really dark blue, but I wanted them to be a little more apparent, and now they are. So this is a very subtle dreamlike page, just touching up with a little more blue, just to draw the eye from left to right and all around the spread. This time, I apologize. I thought I was recording and I wasn't. And then when I thought I wasn't recording, I was. So I missed the part where I painted the blue on this page. But what I did was I put that transparent blue from the bottle right down it with my finger and dabbed it around lightly. And then I let it just sit and get absorbed into the grooves of the background. So I apologize, but that's what I did. So here I've got the previous page spread is quite dry. I could put some matte medium over there I was showing you, but I didn't. I didn't feel the need because the more I use matte medium on the pages, the more sticky they become. And because this is pretty much the middle of my little book now, I don't want all the pages in the middle to be very thick with matte medium and paint, because otherwise it gets quite, it wrecks the binding and it makes the book too thick in the middle. I found a few pieces of scrap printed tissue from my stash, and I thought it'd be interesting to throw a little, instead of keeping this just all dreamy like it was and like the previous page, I thought if I add a little bit of printed tissue, it'll shake things up a bit. It'll add just a subtle bit of texture and pattern. And because it's quite white behind there, this orange is staying true to the orange that it was. It's not turning brown like it has sometimes when I've glued over top of blue, for example. So I'm just adding a little bit of texture. You could have left it as it was as well. It looked fine as it was, but I'm just always trying to play around with other options. So there you have it. That's completely different now. It's really altered. I'm also using the paint spreader edge to flatten firmly in that middle crease, and then dragging it along to remove any excess matte medium that will dry heavy into that crease. And then I'm using my finger just to spread it down firmly in case there were any folds. Then I thought, well, I may as well just apply that matte medium all over the page to give it the same kind of finish. But I didn't do it the spread before because I don't want all that extra matte medium, as I said. So that's fun, that's different. And again, I'm just sort of forcing it down while it's drying. There you go. That's different. So here we have my blue page. I'm trying to decide, you know, it looks wonderful as it is. I could really have just left it like that. But I'm going to add a little bit of color because I'm trying to transition and go to the blue story here, but also keep a little bit of the previous page color so that these pages, these spreads, transition from color to color. So I'm going to spray a little bit of water. I don't want the color to be too strong. I want it to be very subtle. So I'm using my very delicate brush to fan it around. I really was happy with it just being white and blue and black, but that's okay. It's called painting for your soul for a reason. Let's experiment and learn and grow and paint. Again, using these tiny books as an experiment gives you an idea later on. Once you start tackling bigger canvases, you can look back at these and say, oh, that combination really worked. I'll do that again, or something like that again. And sometimes you can look and say, you know what, that didn't work. I won't do it. So there's just a little tiny book. It's just paper. It's here for fun, for play, for exploring, for getting lost in the moment, and it's also a good lesson on what works and what doesn't. So I quite like how I've got hints of the yellow now, and the gold, I mean, and not a lot of it. I really quite like how I removed most of it. Just coaxing a little bit more around the page so it makes sense, but I'm keeping it very light and airy. Very, very subtle. And because I've got some heavier white paint down on the page and I fanned it around with that other brush, there are more grooves and places where paint can settle inside those grooves, as you can see, and that gives it interesting texture and interest. Again, I just want to do it very delicately. So that looks really dark, nothing like delicate, but I can wipe it back. And if I don't like that and it doesn't wipe back, I can use rubbing alcohol to remove. And I want to dab that center seam right away. So all I'm doing there is applying paint and then spraying it so that it'll go into these new grooves that the texture of the paint has made on the page. It's all about putting layers and letting things be revealed. So I do like how subtle that is. I've decided I don't want so much black on the page. So I'm going to put more white in the middle, and then I'm going to extend that white beyond there. I just didn't want a lot of black. And using my finger, I'm kind of doing a dabbing with dry on dry again. I decided I don't love how that turned out, so I thought let's play around with doing more white on the page with a bit of pattern. And this print that I had is a perfect example of adding more white and giving a little bit of texture and interest to the surface. So I'm just cutting. I measured where and folded back where I needed to, and now I'm cutting the tissue paper to fit the page. And I'm only covering the left side. Because the page behind was getting quite sticky as it dried, I needed to quickly put a coating of baby powder on both those pages. Cornstarch works as well. But I wanted to get those two because I've been pressing down on closed pages, and because there was a lot of matte medium there, it was starting to stick. So before I moved forward, I thought I better get those two pages powdered up. And now I'm putting a backing behind there as well. So I'm going to give a good coating of matte medium all over this page. And I'll glue this down. I'm going to hold it in place, especially at the center seam, and pat it down so it fits. And now I'm fanning from the center out, all the way around, fanning around and around to get this applied without. So this is the way you do it so you don't fold the tissue. And then I want to use that paint spreader to flatten it inside the seam, inside the crease of the page. And then I'm removing any excess matte medium and pressing firmly wherever there's any folds of tissue paper. So that's another way of getting the same effect as if I would have used my brush and gone dry on dry and added texture all over the page. It's kind of a, you know, you can almost do it either way. I didn't necessarily have to put that tissue down. I could have just left it because there really wasn't a lot of pattern there. And now I'm just fanning with my brush softly. It's fairly dry on dry again. So I've really altered that page now. You may not like it like that, but that's what I did. I'm revealing some circles again. Give it a good dry. So just a hint of yellow now. Very, very tiny hint of yellow. I decided I needed to do something over there. It just wasn't working. So I'm applying my pre-mixed blue with white fairly firmly with my finger, and now I will spread to make it wherever I've put the water, it shoots the paint away, and then I'm dabbing it lightly. And so I've got kind of a cloudy effect now on the left that matches what's happening in the middle of the spread above my finger there. So it's just showing you how you can have a page continue to develop and grow. It's not as if I love this page, but later on I might like it more. Quite often I like things more after I go and revisit it. But it is a fairly quiet background, and this is one of those spreads where later on down the road I might get a Posca pen out and write a quote or something that's on my mind, or a mantra, or something that means something to me. I'm trying to get a little more paint off with the spray. So I could leave it like this, but I'm going to show you another option because, again, I use these soul journals to look through, and sometimes months later, maybe even a year later, who knows, but I might look and be inspired to write quotes or sayings. And I'm going to glue down with matte medium a little bit of tissue print, which we did in the do-it-yourself stamps and tissue prints with those stamps. I've got a section that I like, and it gave me an idea. So I'm just making some blue as a background so that when I put the white tissue print over top, it will stand out as more of a contrast. If I would have put it down over top what was there, it wouldn't have shown up as well. Now you may think this is a little contrary to the nice calm feel of the rest of the spread and the ovals, but I have a plan here. So I'm just lining up. That was dry when I placed it down. I'm lining up where I want to place it, and now I will use my wet paintbrush method of painting around the silhouette of what I want to use, and then it will easily tear away, as you've seen me do on the other videos. This is such a cool trick. And then most of that tissue, again, when I glue this down, it will look quite pasty, but once that matte medium dries, it dries clear, and the tissue sort of disappears as well. So I'm going to cut off this bottom section and a little bit there. And again, that's just a nice organic edge to the pattern, and that'll be nice. It will be more believable than if I would have cut straight lines with the scissors. So I'm getting the matte medium out, and I'm just going to wet the left side where I'm going to glue this down. So I'll place that down with my fingers just to sort of get it secured in place. And then I will use the paintbrush with a lot of matte medium on it to spread out left to right, right to left, from the center outward. And that way that's glued down, and I'm just going to remove any excess while it's wet. And there you have it. So my thought is, on those white strips, someday down the road, I might take Posca pen and write something funky in there, or just mindful phrases, or something that makes me feel good about myself. Now the thing is, this page is bone dry. That's time-lapsed. It was bone dry, so I'm putting a good coating, as well as repeating the baby powder on the one behind, just to make sure it's good and dry, so that when this book accidentally gets folded together, the pages won't stick together. And now we've got another spread. This is our fourth one. So we did 3 pages with the mark making in advance and then colored them. Now I'm doing something different. I'm using my high flow acrylic white that's in a fine liner tube dispenser. And it's great because it's such a fine line and you can do writing with it. And I love, this is one of the things I do a lot in my abstracts, is I do random writing, which is just make up script. But usually when I'm doing that, I'm saying something powerful, like, I believe in the power of mankind. Even though it doesn't look like that in words, that's the kind of thing I'm saying to myself as I write that out. So I'm going to weigh it down on 2 corners because I don't want to blow dry this. I want to let it dry as is. So now that it's dried, I am spraying a mist of water on there so that it can help this paint flow on the page. Because I didn't protect the paper down below, all I did was put that high flow acrylic writing on there. So what my plan is to start light, keep dabbing it back, and build layers and see how it goes. I was hoping that some of the colors would not only sit on top of the writing like there, but you'll find that because you'll see soon that because it's such a fluid liquid, watered down color, it's not the white script that I wrote down with the fine liner, that paint is like a resist. So as soon as I go and dab this back, it removes any paint that was sitting on top of those lines and it continues to make them look white. And that's just the way that is. So I've shown it in another video that that's one of the ways you can make a resist, is to use that high flow acrylic white in a dispenser and do lines like that, because it will dry quite plasticky, if you will, and therefore very high flow acrylic paint or watercolor, whatever you happen to be using, it's not going to sit on top of that. It will get blasted away with water, and so it'll stay white. If I was to use a stronger paint over top, perhaps it would sit and stain that a bit, but in this case it didn't. It's staying white. But that's okay. It's kind of a fun, happy effect. I don't mind that. So wax crayons we've seen are a good resist, and so is this high flow acrylic out of the dispenser. It becomes a very good resist as well to any paint that sits on it. I'm just trying to decide if I want to try and bring out some more strength of color again to see if it will sit on top of the white scribbling, but I don't think it will. But I'm adding stronger color just to see, and I don't mind adding a little depth. So every time I dab away, it actually in that case did leave some yellow on the script, on the scribble. So that was kind of fun. I do like how the color gets picked up on the script, and it kind of wavy bits of color. But the problem is, as soon as I go and wipe that with a paper towel, or and it's getting absorbed slightly by the pink as well, but as soon as I spray it with water or dab it with anything at all, it's going to remove any of that paint from the scribbles. So there you see it, it becomes white again. But that's okay. I'm just having fun here. Remember, this is playing for your soul. I'm just having fun. So I thought, let's do a few splashes. It wasn't splashing at first, so I have to help it along. The wrong brush. Should have used a longer bristle brush. Anyway, I'm just playing with effects of putting some bits of pink, the fuchsia, magenta, I mean, over top of the wet yellow, and just to watch how it bleeds in. So that's kind of fun. It's definitely a happy spread. Different than the last ones. They were a little more dreamy and moody. This one's just vibrant and happy and fun. I love these colors together. So I'm going to just damp it, press down a little bit and make it a little lighter. I didn't want it too bold. That's fun. It's happy. Bone dry now. I did blow dry it, and once it was really dry, I'm putting a good coating of baby powder on there so that again it won't stick. Even though there's not any matte medium on the page, it's just that high flow acrylic scribbles. The rest isn't going to stick, but I just want to be sure anyway. So I did give it a good coating. So now we've got the last spread of our 5. And I've decided to do something different. I want to cover up some of those marks from the previous spread bled through in the middle of the page and for sure in the seam there in the crease. So I'm using a very thick paste white paint to paint over the entire spread. But you can see I'm fanning the brush around, so it's like mopping it. And you won't see any brush stroke. It's really featherweight. I'm not pressing hard, and I'm kind of just smushing it around the page, if you will, so that there won't be any real obvious brush strokes, but I am giving a bit of coverage and a very thin coating to cover over the paper and protect that paper for future paint that goes down on it. And I gave that a good blow dry, but before I did, just trying to show you, it's not quite a thick coat, it's quite light. So it's bone dry now, and I thought, let's try something. So I brought out a blue and a green pencil crayon to make some purposeful marks. And we'll see if they show up. I've decided on this spread I want to do blue and green. And even though that's showing quite yellow, it is that pale green. I want to start off again light, so I've got a bowl. I'm putting water in it. That's dry blue from before. And then a little bit of the blue. And so what I'm doing is making a watery blue. And I will do the same with my green. It'll be a watery green, giving that a smush. And the green is going to go quite yellow when I put it on the page, because out of the bottle it's green, but as soon as I add it to a lot of water, it becomes quite vibrant. But let's see where we get with this. I'm taking away some of the water, it was too much, and then adding the green. Now that that's bone dry, I can spray some water on there. And look how bright that is. It's almost like a lemon. I love that green. It's so happy. And I want to dab that middle crease before any paint can even get in there, because the paint is already very watered down. So I have to be mindful of that middle section. Also, if you put down a coating of white paint and then very watery paint over top, if you get it too watery and let it sit too watery for too long, it can bubble up and separate that paint. So make sure you don't use a lot of water when you've already got a coating of paint. So again, I'm not doing any more spray of water because already these two colors are very watered down. So that's enough water on top of this white page. And again, I'm just playing around with some splashes. It works better when I've got the longer bristle brush. Before I was using a shorter brush bristles, and it didn't splatter as well. So my goal here is I'm going to cover the entire spread left and right with a white printed tissue. That's why I'm just randomly putting color around the page. I haven't quite decided yet what tissue print I'm going to use, so I can't really plan where to put the colors. I'm just being intuitive, going with the flow. And I like watching what the paint does when you put it down on the page, how it spreads and flows. I'm going to get rid of that paper underneath. It was quite smooth, and I don't want it to force any water to bleed under, or paint to bleed under the backside. And there, I noticed there was some on the backside there, so I gave it a little wipe, and now I'm putting dry paper towel in the back. And I'm just helping along with my finger. I dabbed it in the green, and I'm just sort of smooshing on a little bit more, and I'm just dabbing it lightly with the finger. Because the page is quite wet and it's sitting over top of paint, it will sit there and soak through. So now that it's bone dry, I've pulled out a tissue print that I like. I'm cutting away what I know is excess, and I'm trying to decide. I love how the left page is going to be a completely different pattern from the right. So I'm following that straight line up, and since it is a fairly straight line, I'm using scissors to cut, because in this case I want to follow the line from the painted pattern. And I'm just making sure I remove any excess so that I don't have any excess tissue sticking over the edge of the paper. Same with up top, cut the rest of that off. So I've got the left page ready. Now let's do the right. That's fun how it's different. Now I'm cutting away at the bottom along where the straight line is. And I'll use the scissors from here on because I'm basically making straight. I'm just making a square. So scissors are better than using the brush and tearing, because I do want a good straight edge. I'm cutting right along the edge there while it's folded, and that makes it easier with the scissors to cut it. And one last edge along the top to cut. There we go. This will be happy. This is what I used to call in my first few videos on that weren't in the tiny books. I like to call this the magic. You've got just a random bits of color on the background. As soon as you use matte medium to press and paste these printed tissues over top, it just becomes magic. It just completely alters the page. So I'm using my soft brush to spread matte medium over the entire spread, left and right, but let's do the right side first. If I was to do both pages, one page would start to dry already, so I'm just doing one page at a time. And I'm lining up all the edges, making sure that none of that paper extends into the crease. I want to leave the actual very center part of that crease free of tissue paper and as free of matte medium as I can. Look at that. It's just softened it. It's made it a completely different look. So this is why I call it the magic. This is just transformative. Kind of called this shape shifting as well, because the printed pattern of white over top of the mottled colors underneath makes them change shape. So it reveals completely new possibilities that you can't really anticipate in advance. You could slightly plan for it, but you can't anticipate just exactly how it's going to show up. And that's the fun of putting this down and seeing the big reveal. It's a lot of fun. I get a lot of pleasure out of this technique. So I'm just fanning it all around from the middle out. And I'll make sure I rub it fairly firmly in the middle, in the center crease there, to press it firmly and also to remove any excess matte medium that doesn't need to be in the very middle. Just pressing down any creases, and right there, pressing firmly and removing any excess matte medium. So I'm going to give this a good blow dry. And that's it for this week. I've got 5 spreads here. I hope you've enjoyed it. I love showing all these things with you. There are so many possibilities. I'm just going to straighten that out and take a good little look just to show you. Now you could down the road, when this is dry, someday down the road, you could actually get a pen out and write some words along the path of those white squiggles, but it's up to you. So thanks for joining me. See you next time.